What's up? Round 3 of the notes. Sorry, that was really lame, but whatever. Anyways, so this time we're going to kind of talk about what was going on during the war, but kind of instead of looking at the battles, kind of look at everything else going on. Okay, so we're kind of backtracking what we just talked to in the last video. So let's start with this first one. All right. So initially, Lincoln tried to downplay the issue of slavery. Okay. That's something a lot of people don't really think about. But when Lincoln came to be president and when the Union was kind of falling apart, people were seceding left and right, his main issue was, hey, let's just get the Union back together. Slavery, yes, is a bad issue. We want to abolish, but if we can get people from leaving, we can stop them from leaving. Then we can preserve the Union, and things will be okay. So let's just kind of not so much things about slavery, but try to make it about preserving the Union. That sounds like a better plan to Abraham Lincoln. And the abolitionists were like, heck no, man, this is all about slavery. Okay, you better address this issue because we let you president so you can end this thing. All right, and so then abolition then became the goal of the Civil War for the Union. Okay, and so the abolition, the reversal of slavery, the abolishment of slavery became a main goal for the Union in the Civil War. So in 1862, remember the Battle of Antietam, which happened in Maryland. Okay, that victory, Abraham Lincoln saw this opportunity to make a very tactical position move. Okay, and so this is what he does is he decides to emancipate the slaves in Confederate states, okay, or to free the slaves in Confederate states. And so he issues what is known as the Emancipation Proclamation, okay? And so basically what that says is he frees all enslaved people in the states that were still in rebellion after January 1st, 1863. Okay, so any state that was still in rebellion after 1863, okay, or after January 1st, 1863, all those enslaved people would be free, okay? And so he commanded that the Southern states would free them. Would the Southern states listen to this? No. Well, they're not going to listen to him to do that. But anyways, Abraham Lincoln decided he was going to do it. And so the Emancipation Proclamation, it did not immediately free slaves. It did not apply to slaves in the border states that did not secede. Okay, so like Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, they didn't, their slaves weren't free because of the Emancipation Proclamation. So the question is, how effective was this? So what exactly was the impact of the Emancipation Proclamation? Well, it did not really attempt to free slaves in the regions under Union control or in the border states, but it was an attack on the southern states. Because the ones that were in rebellion on January 1st, 1863, because they were the only ones commanded for their slaves to be freed. And so another thing the Emancipation Proclamation did is it allowed African Americans to enlist in the United States Army as a war measure. They couldn't enlist in the Confederate States Army, but they can enlist in the United States Army. Okay, because think about that too. It would also give a lot of men for the North to use to also fight to help in the South's reign, okay, to help to kind of squash them out in a way. All right. And so that was kind of its impact, looking at the Emancipation Proclamation. We'll skip that. And so speaking of African Americans with Civil War, so you had the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. Okay, so this is the most notable African American military regiment. And so they're most famous for fighting in the Battle of Fort Wagner, which was in Massachusetts. And, a lot of them were recognized for their bravery. And because of their bravery, because of the honor they received, you would have more than 1,800,000 African Americans would volunteer before the end of the war. And so, this was a big deal, okay, because it's allowing African Americans who were kind of viewed as slaves as property to actually take their roles as being a part of the nation. And so African Americans and slaves, they weren't really great at citizenship just yet, but this is their kind of first step into that. Okay, be able to serve the Union, be able to fight and to exhibit this bravery. So Lincoln decides he's going to address the Union. Okay, so in 1863, in the Battle of Gettysburg, that battle turns out to be one of the bloodiest battles ever fought on American soil. Okay, it had 50,000 plus casualties, which is huge. Okay, and November, Abraham Lincoln decides he's going to visit the site to honor the Union soldiers that died during the battle. And this is what is known as the Gettysburg Address. We've heard it before, and I'm actually going to read to you in just a second. But the Gettysburg Address, during that speech, he stated that the Civil War was not a struggle to preserve the Union and fulfill the ideas of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, so we see Lincoln then goes back to what he wanted to do before to preserve the Union. Okay, he in this time, he wasn't really downplaying slavery anymore. He's still addressing it, but he says, hey, guys, let's not make this just about slavery. Let's realize, too, what's also at stake is the Union. Because once this gets all said and done and the dust settles, what are we going to do about, this is going to be awkward between the North and the South. So we got to do what we can to preserve the Union and make things right. So here's the Gettysburg Address. I'll read it for you guys. I'll do my best Abraham Lincoln voice. 70 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. It's a pretty great voice if you say so myself. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of it as a final resting place for those who died there. That nation might live. This we may in all property do, but in a larger sense, we cannot we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have hallowed it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, while it can never forget what they did here. It is rather for us, the living, we are here be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they here gave the last full measure of devotion, that here highly resolved these dead shall not have died in vain. That nation shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth. People go wild and crazy and stuff like that. That was the Gettysburg Address. Okay, sorry, that voice is probably super lame, but there it is. You're welcome. That's a blank thing. All right. Total war. So we talked total war with General Sherman, okay? And so towards the end of the war, the Union adopted a new strategy of total war, okay? This was Sherman's march, okay? And so what that was striking civilian targets as well as military targets to weaken the economy and community that supports the opposing army, okay? And so throughout the Civil War, both the North and the South, they would have to take into consideration the opinions of Great Britain and France. But why, though? So the Confederacy, they needed help from Great Britain and tried to get Great Britain to recognize the legitimacy of the Confederate States of America. Remember the Confederates' plan? They could get Britain on their side to get all the resources they need, all the men they need. And the Great Britain would be a force that would be hard to reckon with for the Union. The Union, though, wanted to prevent that from happening. Okay, and so Great Britain was very anti-slavery, and when Lincoln made the war about slavery, Great Britain was much less inclined to aid the Confederacy. Okay, so that was a big deal for Abe Lincoln to make the war about slavery instead of trying to preserve the Union, because it kept Great Britain out of the war. Because imagine if Great Britain gets to the Civil War and helps the South out, we have a whole different ballgame. I'm not talking to you about the Gettysburg Address anymore. Who knows what our nation looks like. And so Great Britain was able to stay out of the war because the war is about slavery, and Great Britain was very much anti-slavery, even though they're kind of the ones who helped to start slavery. I don't know, kind of confusing. Anyways, moving on. Look at Civil War politics real quick. So not all Northerners were actually in favor of war with the South. And we had people called Copperheads, which were Northern Democrats. Okay, and so they were against war policy, and they wanted to advocate restoration of the Union through a negotiated settlement with the South. Okay, so they wanted to talk things out. They didn't like war. They wanted to basically, keep the South intact and really not try to tell the South what to do. They kind of just want to make things okay. So those are Copperheads. Okay, now the war will come to an end, like we talked about at Appomattox Courthouse. Okay, and so in April of 1865, the Confederate forces could no longer withstand the war, and General Grant would trap General Lee and his troops at Appomattox, Virginia. Okay, and so they would go to the Appomattox Courthouse, And that's where General Lee would officially surrender by signing the papers and giving them to General Grant and saying, hey, we give up. We're waving the white flag. We surrender. The war's over. Okay, so that was a big deal. So let's look at the impact of the Civil War on democracy.